The morning sun was rising over the skyline while I sat in my car outside my husband's office building, feeling that quiet mix of confidence and curiosity that only a mature woman can hold deep in her chest. I had not planned to come here today, but sometimes the universe whispers and a wife listens, and today something in my heart said, go see him, go show up, go remind the world that age may touch the face, but it strengthens the spirit. My husband Ethan had worked at this downtown firm for years, and he always spoke about the new project deadlines, the new clients, the new pressure. But for the last few weeks there had been something else, something unsaid, something he brushed off with a smile that did not reach his eyes and a softness that looked forced. I asked him a few times, but he insisted it was only stress, nothing else. Still, a wife knows. A wife always knows. So I stepped out of my car, fixing the sleeves of my soft beige cardigan and smoothing my hair back in that familiar style that said, I am calm, I am steady, I am not here to fight, but I am not here to be ignored either. The glass doors reflected a woman who had lived 60 years with grace and grit, and I walked inside with a quiet confidence. The front desk assistant greeted me with a warm smile, and I introduced myself as Ethan's wife. She nodded with immediate recognition, but there was something behind her eyes, a flicker, like she knew something, like she almost wanted to warn me, but stopped herself. I thanked her and took the elevator up to the 13th floor. As the doors opened, I heard voices, not loud, but tense, controlled, the kind of tone people use when they want something, but do not want anyone else to know. A young woman stood near my husband's desk, leaning a little too close, her posture too casual, her smile too sugary. She was perhaps late 20s, maybe early 30s, confident in that untested way youth often carries. She was talking to Ethan in a voice that barely tried to hide its intention, a soft, teasing tone that pretended to be innocent, but was not. In my world, we call it try-hard energy. Ethan looked uncomfortable, shifting, glancing down at his papers, trying not to encourage her, and when he noticed me, his eyes widened with relief, like someone had thrown him a lifeline in a storm. The young coworker turned around slowly, and the moment she saw me, she did not look surprised. She looked annoyed, as if my presence had interrupted something, as if I was not supposed to be there. She stepped forward with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes and said in a voice dipped in artificial sweetness, "Oh, you must be his mom." Her words floated in the air, bold, sharp, disrespect disguised as innocence. I stood there steady, unshaken, letting her assumption hang between us, because sometimes silence is more powerful than immediate reaction. I looked at her carefully, taking in the way she stood, the way her eyes flicked toward Ethan, expecting him to laugh or support her or validate her, but he stood frozen, mortified, his face tense, as if he knew a line had just been crossed. I smiled gently, the kind of smile that has lived through decades of life and storms and victories, and said one slow, steady line that made the room shift. "No, dear, I am his wife." Her expression cracked for a single second, just a flicker, but I caught it the way one catches a lie in a child or a secret in an adult. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Ethan exhaled in relief. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder and said, "I thought I would take you to lunch if you are free." Ethan nodded instantly, like a man who had been waiting for rescue of any kind. But the young coworker stepped in front of us, physically blocking the way, like she believed she had some claim, like she believed I should move aside, like she believed maturity equals weakness. Her eyes held a glint that said she thought she could outshine me, outplay me, outsmart me. And that moment right there was when the story truly began. The beginning of everything that would follow. The moment she believed I was too old to notice, too old to understand, too old to matter. But she was about to learn. She was about to learn exactly who I was. The young coworker, whose name I had not even asked yet, stood between us with that bold, careless energy only someone inexperienced carries, the kind of energy that says, "I believe I can win, because I have never truly lost." She lifted her chin slightly, as if challenging me, as if daring me to react, as if assuming a woman my age would shrink back. But I did not move. I did not blink. I simply observed the way her posture revealed everything she tried to hide. She finally spoke, her voice low and coated with pretentious sweetness. "Ethan is actually very busy today. Maybe you can come some other time." Her smile tightened, as if she believed she had authority over him, over me, over this moment. Ethan opened his mouth to object, but I gently touched his wrist, and he stopped, not out of fear, but respect, because sometimes a wife needs to speak for herself, not be defended. I leaned forward just enough to meet her gaze and said, I am sure Ethan can decide his own schedule. My tone soft, steady, unshakable, like a calm tide that carries weight even without force. Her brows tensed for a moment, and then she let out a short laugh, the kind someone uses to cover insecurity. You know, this is a fast-paced workplace, she said, her voice growing sharper, and older employees sometimes struggle to understand how things work here. Older employees. Struggle. Understand. Every word was a deliberate sting, every syllable meant to remind me she thought she owned this space. I let her speak. Sometimes giving someone the space to expose themselves is all you need. She stepped closer to Ethan, placing her hand on the edge of his desk, her body angled toward him as she said, we have a client prep meeting, and I need Ethan for it. We work very closely together, you know. Her tone carried a silent challenge. A silent claim. A silent message meant only for me. Ethan stiffened visibly, and I saw something in his eyes, something protective, something frustrated, something tired. I turned slightly toward him and said, Ethan, sweetheart, do you actually have a meeting right now, or is that something she simply wishes you had? He swallowed hard, then finally said, I do not have a meeting this hour. We finished the prep yesterday, his voice firmer than it had been in weeks, like he suddenly remembered who he was. Her jaw tightened just a little, as if she had not expected him to contradict her in front of me. I took a small breath, letting the tension settle, letting her choices hang around her like fog, and then I asked the question she never saw coming. What is your name, dear? She blinked, surprised that I addressed her so directly, and said in a clipped tone, my name is Brianna. I nodded slowly, letting her feel seen, but not validated, then said, Brianna, thank you for your concern, but Ethan and I will be stepping out for lunch now. You are welcome to handle your work meanwhile. The softness of my voice carried more authority than her loud confidence ever could. She took a step back, but her eyes stayed locked onto mine, irritation simmering beneath her forced expression. She clearly was not used to being challenged, especially by someone she assumed was fragile, outdated, irrelevant. But as Ethan picked up his coat and joined me, I noticed her hand curl slightly into a fist on the desk, a tiny subtle gesture of resentment that told me she was not done, not by a long shot. We walked toward the elevator, and I felt her eyes burning into my back, a stare that wanted to intimidate but only revealed her insecurity, her belief that youth alone gives someone power, her assumption that maturity equals weakness, her confidence rooted in shallow soil. Inside the elevator, Ethan released a long breath, like a man finally relieved from holding something heavy far too long. I looked at him gently and asked, "Want to tell me what that was all about?" His shoulders sagged and he leaned back against the wall as the doors closed. He looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally worn in a way I had not seen in years. He said, "I tried to ignore it, but she keeps pushing boundaries, she keeps creating tension, she keeps making comments and acting like she can replace any woman who is over 30. She thinks older women do not notice things, but she does not know you. She does not know how strong you are." I placed my hand over his and gave it a warm squeeze, letting him feel the steady strength he had been missing, and in that moment I made a quiet promise to myself. This was not about jealousy. This was not about insecurity. This was about respect. If Brianna thought she could toy with my husband and walk over me simply because of age, she was wrong. She was boldly, loudly, disastrously wrong. And she was about to learn that lesson. Not through anger, but through elegance, through wisdom, through truth. The elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened. But the true story, the real conflict, the moment everything would shift, was only just beginning. We stepped out of the building and the cool city breeze brushed against my face, carrying that familiar scent of traffic, coffee carts, and ambition, the kind of air that wakes you up even when your heart is already fully awake. Ethan walked beside me, his steps slower than usual, his mind clearly racing ahead of his feet. I chose a quiet little bistro across the street, a place with soft lighting, warm colors, and the kind of calm atmosphere that lets truths float to the surface. We sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the table, and I watched him fidget with the edge of the menu the way a boy does when he is trying to find the right words. I reached across and touched his hand gently and said, "Ethan, sweetheart, whatever you are holding, speak it freely. I am here." That one line seemed to unlock something in him. His shoulders loosened and he exhaled deeply. He began talking slowly, carefully, like someone peeling away layers they did not realize had grown so thick. He said it started small at first, Brianna asking me questions, pretending she needed help. Then she began showing up at my desk more often. Then she started making comments about how people my age should retire soon, how the company needed fresh energy and new leadership. Then she began hinting that she and I were a better match for certain projects and kept bringing up how older women often don't understand workplace dynamics. I listened silently, letting him talk, letting his voice steady itself. He added, and when she realized I was uncomfortable, she pushed harder. She started making jokes about older wives being insecure about younger coworkers. She kept trying to make me react or laugh. I stayed professional, but she would not stop. There it was. The real heart of the problem. Not flirtation alone, but disrespect. Mockery. A young woman believing she could rise by belittling those who had decades more strength than she ever touched. I felt a calm resolve rise inside me, not anger, not jealousy, just a clear understanding that this was no ordinary workplace irritation. This was someone trying to use youth as a weapon and power as a ladder. I said softly, Ethan, why did you not tell me sooner? He lowered his eyes and replied, I worried it would sound silly. I worried it would make you upset. I worried you would think I encouraged it, but I never did. I shut her down every time, but she acts like boundaries do not apply to her, and today she crossed one I never thought she would. I nodded slowly, letting his honesty settle between us. Then I asked the question I had been holding since the office, why did she look so confident around you? What made her feel so entitled? Ethan hesitated, then rubbed his forehead like a man tired of carrying a truth too long. He said, because management gives her too much freedom. She is the boss's favorite. She talks big, she plays the age card, and they let her get away with things others cannot. There it was. Privilege without experience. Confidence without competence. Authority without accountability. The dangerous trio of modern office politics. I leaned back, absorbing the pieces, fitting them quietly together. I could feel the shape of the problem forming in my mind clearer and clearer. It was not just about her behavior toward Ethan. It was about the environment that allowed her to believe she was untouchable. I looked at him and said, Ethan, your discomfort is valid. Your silence does not make you weak, and her actions are not harmless. They are manipulative, disrespectful, and unprofessional. He looked at me with relief, as if finally someone had said what he had been feeling all along. The waiter brought our lunch, and we began eating, but Ethan's mind was still heavy, swirling with the past week's frustration, and then something unexpected happened, something small yet telling. As we finished eating, Ethan glanced back toward his office window, a reflexive glance, and frowned. He said, she is watching us. I turned my head slightly, and yes, there she was, Brianna, standing near the window on the 13th floor, staring down at us like a hawk perched above the world, as if she could track and monitor every movement Ethan made. I smiled softly, not shaken at all, because this only proved something I already sensed. She was not confident. She was afraid. And fear makes people desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I paid the bill, and we stood up to leave. Ethan looked uneasy, but I placed my hand on his arm and said calmly, do not worry. She thinks she holds power, but she does not understand experience and maturity create a different kind of strength, one she has never met before. As we walked back toward the office building, Ethan asked quietly, what are you going to do? I smiled. A slow, deep, knowing smile. I said, I am not going to do anything dramatic. I am simply going to let her reveal herself, and when she does, the truth will stand in the open, and the truth always wins. He looked at me like he remembered exactly why he married me. Why years had only made me stronger. Why age was not a weakness, but a crown. We reached the lobby, and Ethan squeezed my hand before stepping into the elevator. I watched him go up, knowing the real storm was brewing above. Because Brianna had shown her intent. But she had not yet seen mine. And soon, very soon, she would learn what happens when a young coworker thinks a seasoned wife is too old to notice. She was wrong. And the day was not done yet. When Ethan went back upstairs, I stayed in the lobby for a moment, breathing in the cool air, letting the quiet hum of the building settle inside me. I was not angry, not agitated, not shaken. I was centered, steady, aware that something deeper was unfolding upstairs. Something that needed the calm strength of a woman who had lived enough life to understand timing. After a few minutes, I stepped outside, planning to walk to a nearby bookstore, but halfway across the pavement, I felt my phone vibrate. It was a message from Ethan, short, clipped, urgent. She is causing a scene. I stopped in my tracks. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Just ready. I turned and walked back into the building, my steps slow and measured like a woman who knows she is needed, but does not rush because power does not run, power arrives. When I reached the elevator, I pressed 13, and the ride up felt heavier than before, like the air itself was preparing for what was about to unfold. The doors opened, and the moment I stepped out, I knew something had shifted. Voices. Raised. Sharp. Unsteady. I walked toward Ethan's section, and there she was, Brianna, standing in the middle of the aisle, her face flushed, her eyes wide, her voice cutting through the quiet office like a blade. She was speaking to another coworker, but loud enough for everyone to hear. She was saying she just showed up out of nowhere, acting like she owns the place, and Ethan runs after her like some puppy. Older women always do this. They get jealous, they think they can control everything, they cannot keep up with the pace here, and they know it. The coworker looked uncomfortable, glancing around nervously, but Brianna kept going, fueled by her own misplaced confidence. She added, and honestly, if the company wants to stay relevant, they need fresh energy, not more outdated attitudes and insecure wives dropping in to spy on their husbands. Her words landed in the room like shards of glass. Sharp. Cold. Intentional. Nobody dared speak. Every eye flicked toward me. Every shoulder tightened as if waiting for the impact. But I simply walked forward, slow, calm, unhurried. The coworker whispered, "Brianna, stop," but she did not. She kept her back turned, ranting, unaware that silence can be a warning, and her ranting had created an unnatural hush behind her. Finally, the coworker said softly, "She is right behind you." And Brianna froze. Not gracefully. Not calmly. But stiff like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. She turned around slowly, and for the first time I saw something real behind her eyes. Fear. Not of me, but of being seen. Of her words landing exactly where she never wanted them to. I stood there looking at her with the kind of steady gaze that can silence storms without lifting a hand. I said in a soft voice that carried through the entire office, "Brianna, you seem to have a lot to say about older women. Would you like to say those words?" while looking at one. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening visibly, her false confidence slipping like cheap paint in summer heat. She tried to smile, but it faltered at the corners. I continued so gently that the softness itself felt heavy. "Why do you believe youth gives you superiority? Why do you think experience equals weakness? Why do you feel threatened by a woman standing beside her husband rather than behind him?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her earlier bravado dissolved like sugar touched by rain. I stepped a little closer, my voice still calm, still controlled, and said, "You are confident, but confidence without respect becomes arrogance, and arrogance without wisdom becomes downfall." She blinked rapidly as if the words struck deeper than she expected. The whole office was silent. Phones stopped ringing. Keyboards stopped clicking. Every person frozen, as if watching a moment that would be remembered for years. I did not raise my voice, I did not insult her, I did not match her aggression. Instead, I gave her something far more powerful. Reflection. Truth. Accountability. I said, "You believed I was too old to notice, but what you do not understand is women my age have lived through storms you cannot imagine. We have seen people like you rise and fall. We have watched insecurity disguise itself as confidence and immaturity pretend to be power." Her lips trembled just slightly, and she looked around hoping someone would rescue her, but no one moved. And then I asked the question that cut through her denial like a blade of pure honesty. "What exactly do you think you gain by disrespecting women who walked the path long before you?" She glanced at Ethan, her voice cracking, as she said, "I did not mean anything serious, I was just joking." I raised an eyebrow, kindly letting her hear the truth of her own excuse, and replied, "Then perhaps you should learn the difference between humor and hurt, because jokes that rely on belittling others are not jokes, they are alarms ringing from insecurity." Her face flushed deeper, her arrogance crumbling into something raw and exposed. I stepped back, giving her space, and said, "You are young, Brianna, but youth is not a personality trait, nor is it a qualification. Someday you will be my age, and you will hope the world respects you more than you respect others today." Silence again. A different kind of silence. A heavy, thoughtful one. Ethan finally stepped forward, placing his hand on my back gently, and said, "Enough, let's go." He did not speak with anger, but with gratitude and pride. We turned to leave the office. And as I walked away, I could feel the entire room still absorbing the moment, jaws tight, hearts beating, minds rethinking everything. But Brianna. She stood frozen, her expression stunned, her belief shattered, because she had built her power on assumptions, and I had just taken them apart with nothing but truth and calm strength. And deep down, I sensed she was not done. People like her rarely stop at humiliation. They stop only when they face consequences. The storm was far from over. Ethan and I stepped out of the office aisle and headed toward the elevator, but something in my heart whispered that this moment, the one Brianna had created out of her own insecurity, was not the end of anything. It was only the spark, and when sparks fall in dry places, they create fires that cannot be ignored. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. Ethan, running his hand across his forehead like a man trying to steady himself, he said in a low voice, "I cannot believe she said all that in front of everyone. I cannot believe she went that far." I touched his arm gently and said, "Ethan, she went that far because she believed no one would stop her. She believed she was protected by youth and favoritism. But today she saw something she never expected. She saw the cost of crossing a line she did not understand." He nodded, slowly breathing deeply as the elevator began descending. But just before the doors closed, a voice called out from the hallway, "Ethan, wait." We turned and saw one of his older colleagues stepping toward us, his face serious, eyes full of concern. He said, "Ethan, the manager wants to see you both right now. He heard everything and he is calling an immediate meeting." Ethan stiffened. I did not. I simply tilted my head slightly and said, "Of course we will join him." We followed the colleague into a conference room at the far end of the office, a glass-walled bright space where important decisions were usually made. The manager, Mr. Jacobs, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and steady eyes, stood near the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He gestured for us to sit. Then he called the second person into the room, Brianna. She walked in slowly, the fire of arrogance gone, replaced by something sharp and unsettled. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the coworkers who once laughed at her jokes or entertained her comments now avoided her gaze. She sat across from us, keeping her chin raised, trying to salvage whatever confidence she could, but the shift in the power dynamic was undeniable, and she felt it. Mr. Jacobs cleared his throat and spoke in a calm, even tone, one that carried authority without aggression. He said, "I have received multiple reports about inappropriate comments, inappropriate behavior, and unprofessional conduct, and today I witnessed the tail end of a confrontation that never should have happened." Brianna opened her mouth quickly, desperate to claim control. "Sir, I was only..." He held up a hand, stopping her with quiet force. "Not now," he said. "I will hear everyone one at a time." He turned to Ethan first. "Ethan, tell me what has been happening." Ethan glanced at me, then spoke with a steadiness that surprised me. He explained the past weeks, the comments, the insinuations, the disrespect disguised as jokes, the way she ignored boundaries, and the growing discomfort he had felt, but tried to handle professionally. Mr. Jacobs listened intently, nodding slowly, occasionally taking notes. Then he turned to Brianna. "Your turn." Brianna straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin, trying to reclaim her image. "Sir, this is being blown out of proportion. Older employees often misunderstand younger energy, and sometimes older wives get insecure." And she stopped because she heard the silence. Not ordinary silence, but the silence of judgment. The silence of people recognizing the exact pattern that now exposed her. Mr. Jacobs leaned forward and said firmly, "Brianna, this is not about energy or youth or insecurity. This is about respect and conduct and professionalism, and your behavior has clearly crossed every boundary we uphold here." Her face fell, but her pride pushed her to speak again. She said, "I was only joking. I did not mean anything literally." He replied, "Jokes that target age or gender are not jokes. They are violations of policy." Then he glanced toward me, and his voice softened, not with pity, but with respect. "Ma'am, would you like to share your perspective?" I nodded once and spoke clearly, evenly, with no anger, just truth. I said, "I came today to take my husband to lunch, not to interfere with work, but what I saw was a young woman who believed she had the power to insult, dismiss, and belittle someone simply because of age. I saw someone who thought experience made a person outdated and youth made her superior, and I saw someone who assumed a wife would be blind, silent, or irrelevant." Brianna looked down, swallowing hard, her confidence crumbling piece by piece. I continued, "My presence is not a threat, but her behavior was a statement that older women do not matter, and that is not only incorrect, it is dangerous." The room stayed still. No shifting chairs. No sighs. Just absorption. Truth settling where denial once lived. Mr. Jacobs folded his hands and said thank you, then turned toward Brianna with a tone that left no space for excuses. Brianna, I have heard enough. The reports align, the witnesses align, the behavior is consistent, and the disrespect is undeniable, so here is what will happen. She looked up quickly, hope flickering in her eyes for leniency, but hope is not a shield against accountability. He said you will be removed from the current client project effective immediately. You will undergo mandatory workplace conduct training, and you will be placed on a probationary performance plan starting today. Her face flushed with humiliation. Not rage. Not defiance. Humiliation of the deepest kind. Because she had fooled herself into thinking she was untouchable. But no one is untouchable when truth enters the room. She whispered, this is unfair. She glanced at Ethan for support, then at me, her expression twisted between embarrassment and resentment. But neither of us looked away. We did not need to. Mr. Jacobs continued, additionally, any further disrespect toward any employee or their families will lead to termination. This is your final warning. Brianna sat back, frozen, her lips trembling, her pride cracked wide open. The meeting ended. People filed out. Ethan and I stood together as the room emptied. He whispered, thank you for being here. I squeezed his hand and said, always. When we stepped out of the conference room, I saw Brianna standing alone near the window, her shoulders hunched, small, fragile, in a way she had hidden with arrogance for weeks. For a brief second, I almost felt pity. But pity is not the lesson she needed. Accountability was. She looked up at me, her eyes red, but her voice barely steady, and said, you did not have to do that. You made me look weak. I walked to her slowly and said softly, I did not make you look weak. I made you see the weakness you were hiding beneath arrogance, and someday you will understand that this moment will change you if you let it. She did not reply. And I did not stay. Ethan and I walked out of the office hand in hand, and the day felt lighter. But the story was not done yet, because storms do not end with consequences. Storms end with clarity, and tomorrow was going to bring something neither of us expected. The next morning, sunlight slipped through our bedroom curtains in a soft, quiet glow, but Ethan woke up slower than usual, like a man carrying the echo of yesterday in his bones. I watched him sit at the edge of the bed, his shoulders slightly tense, his fingers rubbing his temples the way he always did when he was deep in thought. I moved beside him and placed my hand gently on his back and said, Ethan, today is a new day. Yesterday brought truth and clarity, and today will bring strength. He nodded slowly, then whispered, I just hope things are calmer in the office today. I smiled and said, truth has a way of calming storms, even when the wind still feels heavy. We had breakfast together, and then he left for work. I stayed home, but a small part of me sensed that today was going to open another chapter, a chapter that would show the true aftermath of what had unfolded. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. You will not believe what just happened. I called him immediately, and he answered with a voice full of disbelief, not fear, not stress, just shock. He said people are acting completely different today. Coworkers came to my desk and apologized for not stepping up earlier. They admitted they had seen things Brianna said or did but stayed quiet because they thought she was harmless or because they did not want drama. I listened, letting his words sink in, because change often begins in the small places where silence breaks. He continued, even the manager spoke to the team this morning. He said our workplace is supposed to be respectful to everyone regardless of age or gender. He said the company culture needed to reflect maturity, not insecurity. I smiled softly, proud of him, proud of the shift, proud that truth had rippled outward into something bigger than just us. Then Ethan said something that surprised me. He said, and Brianna came in late today. She looked different, quieter, almost like she had been forced to face herself for the first time. Hours passed while Ethan worked, and I went about my day, cleaning, watering the plants, reading a little, but inside me a sense of stillness stayed, like the air right after rain when everything feels freshly grounded. Evening came and Ethan walked through the front door with a look I could not immediately decipher, a mixture of relief and something else, something unexpected. I asked what happened now. He sat on the couch, exhaling deeply before speaking. She asked to talk to me privately. I raised my eyebrows, not out of shock, but curiosity. What did she want? He ran a hand through his hair and said she apologized. For a moment the room felt completely still. He continued, she told me she had never been confronted like that by anyone, especially not by a woman who stayed so calm. She said she felt ashamed. She said she did not realize how ugly her behavior was until she saw how she looked in front of you. I felt a soft, quiet understanding rise in me, because sometimes the deepest lessons come wrapped in humiliation, not cruelty. Humiliation can either break a person or rebuild them, and today it seemed to be rebuilding her. Ethan added, she said she grew up around people who believed youth was everything, and she carried that mindset into work, but yesterday forced her to see how wrong that was. He paused, then said, and she thanked me for not yelling and for keeping things professional. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of his words settle, because accountability had bloomed into something rare. Honesty. Recognition. Growth. Then Ethan said, and she asked me something unusual. She asked if I thought she could learn from older employees instead of competing with them. My heart softened. Not toward her behavior, but toward the possibility of her becoming better. I asked, and what did you say? Ethan smiled gently. I told her that experience is a gift, not a threat, and that she could learn more from you in 10 minutes than she had learned from her entire attitude this year. I laughed softly, and he took my hand, pulling me closer. But the evening was not finished, because just as we were settling down, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. A short message. Can we meet? I want to apologize to you properly. It was Brianna. I looked at Ethan, and he said gently, you do not have to meet her. But something in me knew this was part of the final chapter. Not for her, but for us. So I replied, yes, we can meet tomorrow morning at the cafe across from the office. When morning arrived, I walked into the cafe and found her already sitting there, looking small, humble, changed. She stood. When she saw me, her posture unsure, her confidence stripped down to something more human. She said, thank you for meeting me, and she looked me in the eye with sincerity I did not expect. I sat and nodded for her to continue. She took a deep breath and said, yesterday opened my eyes. I realized I had been acting out of insecurity, not confidence. I was trying to feel powerful by stepping on others, especially older women. I was wrong, truly wrong, and I wanted to say I am sorry to you. I studied her for a moment, letting her sincerity settle, and then said softly, growth often begins where pride ends. You made mistakes, but seeing them is the first step toward becoming someone better. She blinked quickly as if holding back emotion and whispered, thank you for handling me with grace. You could have crushed me yesterday, but you did not. I smiled gently and said, I did not need to crush you. Life teaches everyone eventually. I only held up the mirror. She nodded, understanding it completely. Then she said the words I never saw coming. I want to be better. I want to learn from women like you. I want to carry strength, not arrogance. And in that moment, I realized something profound. This story, this conflict, this showdown, was never just about boundaries. It was about transformation. I stood up and she stood with me. I touched her arm lightly and said, then start today. She nodded with real gratitude in her eyes. When she left, I felt something inside me settle, like a chapter closing gracefully. And when I turned around, Ethan was standing at the door of the cafe, smiling at me with the kind of love that grows deeper with years. He said, I knew you would fix this. And I said I did not fix it. I simply reminded someone of the power respect and age carry. We walked out together into the sunlight, hand in hand. A day brighter than the one before. A marriage stronger. A workplace wiser. And a young woman changed. But the story still had one more part. The part where everything finally reaches its quiet, beautiful conclusion. As I stepped into that bright glass office, the entire place shifted, like someone had turned a spotlight in the wrong direction, because suddenly every whisper, every glance, every tiny smirk that had been floating around the room froze in place, and the young coworker who had been circling my husband for weeks finally understood that her game was over. She straightened her blazer and tried to walk toward me with that fake confident stride, but her eyes kept flicking toward my husband, hoping he would jump in and save her, but he just stood there stunned, because he finally realized how much I had already seen and how long I had stayed silent, waiting for the right moment to end this little show in one clean move. I walked past her slowly, taking in the room, the open screens, the half-finished project she kept dragging my husband into, and I could feel every employee watching me like a live episode was unfolding right in front of them, and honestly, I wanted her to feel every inch of that pressure, because she had spent weeks pretending I was invisible. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, and she stopped mid-word because she finally felt the weight of a woman who had lived enough life to read every intention in a single breath, and I told her in the calmest voice that I was not here to accuse her or embarrass her, but to remind her that respect is not optional and experience is not something you can outshine with a new hairstyle and a loud attitude. The entire room stayed quiet because they all knew she needed to hear it, and I could see my husband exhale like he had been holding his breath for days trying to navigate her constant interruptions, her dramatic reactions, and her habit of inserting herself into every conversation he had. She tried one last time to reclaim the moment by insisting she was only helping him grow faster in the company, but I stepped closer and looked her in the eye and told her that real professionalism never requires crossing boundaries, never requires undermining a marriage, and never requires pretending that a wife is too old to notice anything. Her face softened like reality had finally settled in, and for the first time, she lowered her gaze because she understood that this was not about jealousy or insecurity. This was about respect and clarity and the truth that someone with years of wisdom will always see through a shallow performance. My husband walked to my side and placed his hand gently on my back, showing the entire room that we were a team, not a weakness, and the coworker stepped back, almost relieved, as if someone had just handed her the first honest feedback she had received in months. The manager called her into the conference room for a talk, and the staff pretended not to watch, but everyone knew something big had shifted that day because the young coworker who thought she was untouchable had finally met a boundary she could not push through. As we left the office, my husband whispered that he was proud of how I handled everything, and I told him that when you know your worth, you do not scream, you do not fight, you simply walk in with dignity and let the truth handle the rest. Outside, the air felt lighter, like the universe had cleared the path, and as we walked to the car, he slipped his arm around me and said that age is not a disadvantage, it is a superpower, and that he was grateful every single day to be married to a woman who knows exactly when to stay quiet and exactly when to step in and remind the world who she is. And in that moment I smiled because nothing feels stronger than reclaiming your space with grace, patience, and a perfect sense of timing.